Okay, so welcome. As I said, this is a bit of an introduction to Xlights. I'm going to cover some basics and get you up and going, show you how to do some common things. I'm going to endeavour to answer some of the questions that were voted for on the Facebook page, including exactly what the universe and start channels are and how to get your head around that if you're not familiar with it. But let's start off with a show folder because that's where it all starts. Xlights needs a place to store all of your sequences, your layout and everything else, and that's done in a show folder. Now typically you'd put that into your desktop or onto your documents folder or something. And so I'm going to create a new folder here. Now you can do this as you start Xlights up for the first time, but I've done that before. So I'm going to go and create a new show folder here. And I know a lot of people like to have a show folder or like to have the date in, right? So this is going to be 2018. We're setting up for a new year. So we want to create a folder for our show and call it 2018. Now, the problem with this is actually going to give you some grief. The way Xlights works in terms of tracking down files and everything else means that it gets very anchored around what this file is, or what the name of this folder is. And so if you call it 2018, it's going to work perfectly all year. It's going to be magic. Your show will be great. Everything will be good. And then you'll come along next year and you'll copy your files or you'll rename your folder 2019. And if you rename your folder 2019, everything will suddenly break. All your images will be missing, your audio files won't be found, and you'll be tearing your hair out. Or even worse, what will happen is you'll copy your 2018 and you'll call it 2019, and everything will look okay and you'll start work and everything will be good. And then at some point in time, you'll decide, you know what, that 2017 folder or, 2018 folder, I don't need that anymore. I'm all good. My 2019 looks great. So I'm going to go and delete that or archive it, move it somewhere else, throw it out onto a CD or a backup disk or a USB stick or something, and suddenly everything will break. And that will be because everything is still pointing back to the 2018 folder, and that will cause you all sorts of grief. So my suggestion to you is, by all means, separate things out by year. Everyone likes to have that sort of point in time view, but then go and create yourself another folder inside that folder for your actual show folder. Call it Christmas. If you really want to have two, let's say you've got a very different layout for Halloween, by all means, go and create a Halloween folder. That's fine. And then make this your show folder. And the beauty is when you copy it to your 2019, the show folder, which is actually the Christmas folder, is exactly the same name. And Xlights has the smarts to be able to find things if that's the case. So create a show folder which has a name that doesn't have the date in it, but by all means put it inside a folder that does. Okay, so that's the first thing. So here's Xlights. We need to point it now at our show folder. I strongly recommend you link these in the media directory and the show directory. I'm not a big fan of keeping these things separated. It causes grief if you have a tendency to move things around between computers. So keep it simple, everything in your show folder. So let's go and find our show folder. So it's in here, 2018, Christmas. We select the folder. All right, so we're all ready to go, and let's go back and look at our show folder. So first thing we'll do is I'm going to just quickly click on Save Setup and Save Layout. Not that there's anything in them, but let's do that because that's going to create some basic folders. So there's a couple of things you'll notice that have been created in here. First of all, there's a backup folder. Now the backup folder, Xlights will by default liberally back things up for you. You know, at times, Xlights, particularly if you're keeping it up to date regularly, it does crash from time to time. It's not perfect software. And so we do a bunch of things like auto backups, backups on start, etc. And all of those are going to be dumped up into that backup folder. And every now and then, you're going to want to go in there and grab something out of it. The Xschedule data folder, you can largely ignore. This is a folder that is used by the scheduler to store some session type data. So you really don't need to spend any time in there. And then you have these two files. Now the Xlights Networks file is a file that's going to store all of your controller configuration, which is all the data that's going to appear on this screen here. And the RGBFX file it stores a bunch of stuff. Primarily it's the data that appears on your layout, which is going to be your house layout and everything else. So those two files are pretty key. And then of course the other files it's going to create are your sequence files. So that's the basics of where. So when you have a problem or when we want to reproduce a problem, these are the files we're going to be chasing down because these are the things that let us see your show folder. Now you can have as many show folders on your computer as you like. I have dozens or probably not hundreds yet, but definitely dozens of show folders from various people that have had problems, and I can bring up and look at their display and attempt to reproduce problems that they've been experiencing. All right, so that's all well and good. Now let me go to my speaker's notes. Okay, so let's start off with then the settings menu, because there's a couple of settings I firmly believe that you should be getting right. So the first one is render on save. Turn it off. The problem with render on save is every time you go to save your sequence, it goes back and re-renders it all from scratch. And look, Xlights does a reasonable job of keeping rendering up to date at any rate. And it just slows down your saving. And I personally don't think it adds all that much value. You can definitely click a render all when you need to, and we'll go through that a little bit later. But yeah, I would generally turn this off. As you get closer to Christmas, you may want to turn it on because you always want to make sure your FSCQ file, which is the actual data file, is up to date. But generally speaking, to me, this just slows my process down. Backup on launch, I would always turn on. That ensures that every time you start up Xlights, you definitely have a snapshot of everything that as it was at the beginning of the session. So no matter what you do in that session, you always know that you can go back to where you were. The next one I do is I would turn on backup subfolders. What this does is when that backup runs, it makes sure that it goes down any subfolders within inside your show folder and backs up any XML files in there. So if you store all of your sequence files in your show folder rather than in a subdirectory underneath it, maybe you don't need to turn that on, but I would generally turn that on. Which other ones? Play controls on preview. I like that turned on, so I would generally turn that one on. I would generally set autosave to 3 minutes. The only time I would change that is if you happen to be working with really, really large sequence files. Maybe you've imported large LOR sequences as effects, and so consequently your sequence files are really, really large. This will cause you some pain if this is set too high, because every time it tries to save, Xlights will noticeably pause. But for your average user building your average sequence, the autosave takes next to no time, definitely under a second, and you won't even notice that it's on. And so therefore setting it to 3 minutes means that basically if Xlights crashes, you'll never lose more than 3 minutes worth of your work. So I tend to like that. I'd also turn model blend default off. Model blending allows you to blend effects across models. I personally don't use it very often. I just generally don't think people use it very often. It's cool when you need it, and you can turn it on a per sequence basis. But by default, I turn it off. Okay, so that's getting Xlights all configured. Within my show folder, look, I like to keep things kind of neat. So what I will do is I will create here an audio subfolder. If I could spell, it would be better. I would also generally create a folder for any videos. I'd also generally create a folder for any images that I'm going to use in my sequences. I would also generally create a folder called imported. And this is where I would place any sequences that I am going to import into XLights, whether it's a sequence that someone else has shared, like one of Logan's sequences, or one that you've purchased, or maybe it's your LOR sequences that you're bringing across. I would generally throw everything into the imported folder for a couple of reasons. One is that particularly when you're importing XLight sequences which contain themselves images, etc., it will make sure that all of those things now live inside your show folder, which means as you move from year to year, you don't suddenly lose all the images associated with sequences that you've imported. And then within that folder, you know, I would create a subfolder for, let's say I was buying one of Lilia's sequences, and then I'd create a subfolder for each one that I purchased, and separate them like that, and make sure that everything is located nice and neatly under my show folder. In terms of, you could create a sequences folder here and put all of your sequences in that folder or in subfolders under it. That's cool. If you do that, you do need to make sure you've got backup subfolders turned on. Otherwise, your backups will only contain these two files and won't contain all your sequences, which is probably not what you intended. So let's go and grab a few things. I have a LAW file here that I'm going to be importing, so I'm going to throw that in the imported file. I have an audio track, I'll throw that in there. I do need a house image, and I'm going to throw that in my show folder, or I could throw it in the images folder. You're going to need a house picture for your background. It makes it so much easier to put your layout out. I choose to, and this is a bit old, but I choose to take a photo of my house with my lights on. This one's actually quite an old photo, but by doing so, it means that when I do my layout, I can overlay things exactly where they are from the perspective. And, you know, seriously, I've been tempted to paint a dot on the road where I took this photo, because this is going to be the perfect place to watch my show. Everything will be laid out appropriately to it. So you're going to need an image of your house. Now, you don't need an image to sequence, but like I say, I think it's good. All right, now, setup. Now, if you don't have any controllers, quite frankly, you don't need to put anything here at all. If you do have some controllers, you can go and set up some universes for your controllers. A couple of traps for young players. People will read their manual for their controller, and they'll find out that their controller supports 96 universes, so they'll go and allocate 96 universes to their controller. This is pretty much universally a bad idea, and I wouldn't do it. I happen to have a couple of controllers plugged in at the moment, and you know, I could go and create some universes for that, but I definitely wouldn't create the maximum. So let's do that. Let's go and create some universes. So basically, each different controller type accepts different types of data. The bulk of the big pixel controllers out there are going to want E131 data. If you've got some LAW boxes or some Renard that are actually attached to a dongle on your PC, you'll want to add one of these USB outputs, because that's how you reference them. And that's as simple as clicking on Add USB, choosing the appropriate protocol. So, you know, if it's a LAW and you're using it in LAW mode as opposed to DMX mode, which, to be honest, is the better way to run LAW controllers, as long as your LAW controller supports it, then you would choose the COM port that it happens to be attached to. And you would define the number of channels. So if you just had a 16 channel controller, you'd put 16 in there, and you'd say that's my LAW controller, and that would be it. Okay, so here I have a LAW controller I'm going to talk to over DMX attached to COM6, and I will have 16 channels of data that I can now program on that. So that's how you would have a LAW controller. Now, if you've got 4 of them chained together, then you'd obviously define this as 64 channels because there's 64 channels there. If those channels aren't laid out consistently, if you're not using unit 1s through 4 and therefore channels 1 through 64, you had some other random number, then you would obviously need to allocate more channels to make sure enough data was being sent out to those law boxes. It's just as easy here to make this 512. The maximum in this case would be 512. If you're taking your law boxes and plugging them into another controller, if you're plugging them into your Falcon, for instance, and you're running your law controllers off the serial outputs on a Falcon controller, then you would not add your law controllers this way. Instead, you would come down to the E131. You'd put in the IP address of your Falcon controller. I always do unicast. I'm not a big fan of multicast. There are some circumstances where it makes sense, but generally speaking, I don't think it does. So here I would add one universe. I'm going to call it universe 1. I'm going to make it 512 channels. And then I would actually go onto the Falcon controller and configure this data to go to that law controller. For instance. So that's how you would handle a law controller attached to a Falcon or any other controller that supports the plugging in of a serial connected controller to it, including a Pi, etc. Okay. Now we can also come in here and allocate a block of data. So if we've got our Falcon controller, and while a Falcon controller would support 96 channels, 96 universes, I wouldn't add that, but I could come into here and add, I don't know, let's add 20. 1, 2, 5. Now I like starting the number of universes you've got is like 64,000. So there's no shortage of universes. So one of the things that is nice is if you start each controller on its own block of 100, and that way you've universally got a bunch of space. We're going to allocate 10 universes. The Falcons are quite happy with 512. Some of the older controllers don't like 512 because it's not divisible by 3, but the Falcons are quite happy with it, and there's no reason not to use all of the channels. So this happens to be an F4. And so it's allocated 10 universes. I'm going to delete this one. I don't really need that. And so I've got a nice set of 20 universes allocated for that controller, which we can start to use. If I want to later, I can always add more universes here, which is why you don't need to go and add that huge block. You can always add them back in later. If you've got a second controller, it's as simple as coming in. I happen to have an E682 here, so I'm going to start that at 200. I'm going to allocate 12 universes, and in the case of the E682, I think it cares about the number of channels, so I'm going to leave it as 510. And it's as simple as adding that. So now we have a bunch of universes allocated for our controllers. The data is all nicely being unicast out to them. The difference between unicast and multicast is this data is only sent to this controller, and it doesn't clutter my network up with a whole bunch of what effectively turn out to be broadcast type packets on most networks at homes. So that's how you would set one of this up. Now, you don't need to do this. If you haven't bought your controllers yet, you don't really need to define all of this. You could, to be honest, just as simply go in and allocate yourself, I don't know, 10,000 channels of data, and it would do the same thing. So here I've just got 10,000 channels, and I can just start to go and build my show based on that. And then later on, I can come in and delete this and create my controllers that I'm actually going to have, because I should have done that. Now we're going to come back to this when we comes time to actually define everything, get everything configured on our controllers. So there's our Falcons added. Starting US 200. We said we're going to allocate 12 at 510. Okay, now if your controller happens to be plugged in, a very quick way to check that this is all okay is to open the controller. And I'll drag my browser over from my other screen if it's going to let me. Why is it? That's it. And it opened up my browser and showed me the controller page. And if I come down here to my E682, it does the same thing. So I know that IP address is right because it opened up my controller web pages just perfectly. And we'll save that file so we don't lose it. We then have layout. And layout is the screen where we get to go and build all of our models and our houses across our house, lay it all out across our house. And the first thing we're going to want is a background image, which we know we've got. So I'm going to click here on the background image, click on the ellipses, go into my images folder, grab my house, and it's put my house image in there. I'm going to do, oh, fills doesn't work. Now that's a little bit, I need to shrink the image down a little bit so I can play with that. Oh, we did 80 is a bit little, okay. 800 is a bit low. There we go. That's not too bad. So playing with these, just adjust the width so that you can see the whole image. Because not everyone's screen resolution's the same. It's one of these things we need to do a little bit better with. It would be nice if this was scrollable and zoomable, but we might get there. All right, so now we've got our house image as a background. The next thing you want to do is dim that thing down, otherwise you'll never be able to see anything. So if we cut it to 50%, yeah, maybe a little bit lower, 40%, and we'll save it. All right, so now we've got our house in the background and we're ready to put our models in. Now, to add your models, you've got all the model types up here. Very quickly, if you just put your mouse over it, it shows you what each one is. We'll start with our tree so you can kind of get a feeling for what it's like to add a model. Actually, no, I'll start with one of, which one's the simplest one? No, we'll start with the tree. Okay, so to drop a model on it, single click onto the model. If you click a second time, it's going to drop multiple trees. You don't want to be in that mode. So this is a multi-state button that goes through 3 states. So this is drop 1, drop multiple, and that's deselected. So we drop 1, we come over to here, we start on the middle of the tree and stretch our tree up and say, yep, there's our tree. And now we need to configure our tree and set all of our properties. So I'm going to come around to here, and this is a round tree. It's actually only 270 degrees. I've actually got a section at the back of the tree that's not there, and the reason I do that is because you can't see the back of the tree, so what's the point of putting a whole bunch of pixels there? And by the time I add a bunch of pixel strips, you can't really see through the tree either, so there's really not a lot of point to it. You then need to actually, all of these things here are largely about appearance. We'll come back to spiral wraps in a minute. The next thing I need to do is think about, well, how does my actual tree configured? In this case, this tree here is a single string of lights that zigzags up and down the tree. So the number of strings, and read number of strings as being the number of physical lengths of lights that are attached to my controller, is 1. How long is that string? That's a good question. I can't remember offhand, but I do know that it's 18 strands, or sorry, 18 zigzags of 19 pixels. That doesn't look right. 18 times 19, 342. Okay, so the number of nodes in this case would be 342. And as I said, it zigzags up and down 18 times, so the number of strands per string, or think of this as the number of zigzags, is 18. And it looks exactly as it should do. So what's happening here is the strings are zigzagging up and down, and you can actually come into the wiring view here and see it. You can come in here and see, here are my strings zigzagging up and down the model. Now this happens to be the reverse view, but we can flip it around and look at it from the front, which doesn't look much different, but everything starts over here somewhere. Number one's, it's kind of hard because it's actually showing the tree as it's laid out. Number one's hidden in there behind something else. But you can see how the strings are zigzagging up and down the tree all the way around. The starting location, so in this case the starting location is the bottom left, and what that means is it starts here at the back of the tree and it will come around the tree. If yours starts here at the right hand side, then you would set bottom right. If yours starts up here at the top, at the back here on the left, you would set it to top left, and obviously top right if it's over here. So getting that starting location right is also important. And that's pretty much it. Now, yeah, eventually we're going to come back and we're going to do things like set the start channel, which is going to be really important, but it's a little premature to get caught up with start channels. We'll come back to that in a minute. So that looks good. There's my first tree. Now let's try a different style of tree. I also now, which is not shown here, but I now have a tree that actually covers this arch and sits right underneath that star. But in this case, it's a flat tree. It's like a classic ribbon tree. So it's a flat tree like that. Actually, maybe a ribbon tree is better. It's probably more accurate. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to do a flat tree. In this case, the number of strings is actually 8. Yeah, I think I have 8 connections back to my controller. So there's 8 wires that run from the tree back to my controller. So I'm going to set that to 8. The nodes per string in this case is 300. It's a 150 5-volt strip, and it goes once down and once up. So there's 300 nodes per string, and the strands per string in this case are 2, because each strand goes up and down. So that makes it a total of a 16-strand tree, as you would expect. In this case, it actually starts at the top left because my controller sits up here on the balcony, and so my data starts over here on the left-hand side, runs down and up, then the next one starts up here and goes down and up, and so forth. So that's how I would build my ribbon tree. The final type of tree I have in my display is I have some spiral trees over here. They're tiny little spiral trees. So in this case, we'll leave them as round because they are actually 3D round trees. But in this case, I need to put in a number of spiral wraps, and that's the number of times the lights wrap around the tree from the bottom to the bottom. Sorry, the bottom to the top. And so that's 4 spiral wraps. It's 1 string. There's actually, I think, 34 nodes per string, and there's only 1 strand per string. Now let me make this a little bigger so you can kind of see it. So you can see how that's created a spiral looking tree. It's kind of hard to see with so few nodes, but they're only small trees. So that's created a simple spiral tree. Bottom left means that the data goes in from the bottom up to the top. And so I've got 10 of those that run down the left-hand side of the fence here. So that's 3 different styles of tree, all built using the one tree model, just with different settings over here to get those trees right. Okay, so the next one, let's do our matrix here, and you get you a feel for that. Should I pause? Are there any questions that I'm missing or things that I need to go over?
No questions yet, sir.
All right, we'll keep going. All right, so now I have my matrix. So let's configure that one. This one happens to be a horizontal matrix, that's correct. In this case, I actually only have 3 connections back to my controller, so I'm going to make that a 3. The number of nodes per string, well, let's do the folds first, because in this case there's 6 folds per string, so there's 6 strands per string, and I know each strand across the tree is 48, so 6 times 48 is 288 nodes per string is my matrix. So it's 3 strings, goes across and a back 6 times, and then the next string starts across and a back 6 times, and then so on. It happens to start in the bottom left, so the first pixel is the one down here, so that's correct. So that's my pixel matrix. I also have a P10. And let's do a P10 because a P10 is a little bit different. So I have a P10 tune-to sign that happens to sit up here. In the case of a P10 panel, every row is a string. Each panel is 16 high. I have 3 panels high, I think it's 3 or 4. Maybe it's 4. It's actually 4, which means I have 64 strings. Each string is 2 panels across, which happens to be 64 as well. And there's only 1 strand per string, because on a P10 panel, every line is a separate string. And so that's your configuration for a 2x4, 2 across, 4 down P10 panel. In this case, it doesn't start bottom left, it starts top left, because that's how my P10 is configured. And that's how you model your P10 panel. It's pretty easy. Okay, so they're the key models. House outlines, probably the next most common model. You can do that with the single line, or if your house outline is all connected together, you may choose to use the polyline. Let's start with the single line, and we'll come back to the polyline. In the case of the single line, it's important that you know where your controller is, or where your data enters your single line. This line here that runs down the side, it used to be a rope light, but now it's a line of pixels, and the data happens to start here at the top right, and then it goes down to here. And so when I draw my single line, I'm going to start it here, and I'm going to drag it down to here. And that's my single line. Okay. You need to worry about the number of nodes per string. I don't remember what this is. It's definitely not 50, but there's only 1 string. It's 64 long. 1 light per node. I pretty much always leave it as that. There are some circumstances where you don't, but pretty much I do that. And it definitely starts where the green square is. And so that's how I would draw a simple single line. For a polyline, again, think about where the data enters. So in my case, I have a line, I have a string that starts here and goes all the way across my roof, but it's 1 string of lights. So I'm going to start it here. I'm going to drag it out to here, back to here, up to here, across to here, and down to here. Okay, so now, but the problem is it just keeps on wanting to go further. To stop the polyline drawing, press the escape key, and it locks it in place. Now the problem is it's gone and spread my 50 nodes across that polyline, which of course isn't true. But what you need is you need to cohere and define some individual segments, and this is where you get to specify how many bulbs there are in each segment. So I might have 64 bulbs in the first segment, I might have 20 in the second, I might have 34 in the next, right? I might have 10 in this section, and then I might have 80 down the back. So that's how you would spread out different numbers of lights across each segment. Segments can also be created with 0. So let's create another polyline here. We'll just draw one up here. not every segment actually has to have bulbs. So you can actually create individual segments and you can say, yeah, that's 21, but that one there is 0. There are no bulbs. And now you end up with this polyline model with a gap in it, but it's still one model. That's that bulb there will be followed immediately by that bulb there, even though there's a gap. So you can use the polyline model to also model areas where maybe you've run an extra piece of wire to separate the pixels. That is possible. But I'm going to delete that because that's not how mine's set up. So that's a single line and the polyline. I'll do a couple more of these models. Let's do my stars.
Hey Keith, Gil said in the chat if you can show them how to curve the polyline.
Oh yes, I can. I'll do my arch in just a second. Let me do the star and I'll come. Actually, I'll leave the star there. We'll come back and we'll do that. Notice how this damn thing keeps moving. If you right click on it and lock it, I now won't move if I accidentally select it. All right, so polyline to do an arch. So there's a string of color effects lights that happen to go around this arch. And so let's model that. So we're going to start here on the bottom left because that's where my controller is. We're going to come up to this point here because that's where the arch starts. And we're going to click once there. Now, rather than trying to follow the arch around and click multiple times, what I'm going to do instead is come over to here, which is where the arch stops, and I'm going to put another anchor point there, and then I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to put a final anchor point down there, and then I'll press escape and lock it in. Now I'm going to go and define the segments. In this case, it is actually 50, but I think it's, I don't know, let's just make it 18, 18 and 14, which takes us back up to 50. Now, we'll select the model. So if I want to make this top part an arch, we are going to lock some things here because it's doing my head in. All right, so first of all, you need to select the segment that you want to make an arch. So click on that segment so you get the pink line here. If you then right click, you can define a curve. And when you define a curve, you get these red squares, which you can then, once the mouse turns into the arrows, you can click on this, and this becomes like a Bezier curve, where you can drag it up, you can drag the other one up as well, and you can actually map the bulbs or match the bulbs to that curve. Now, it's probably not perfect, but it's quite frankly good enough for me. And if I click off it, let's take this down to 10 so you can see it, and you can see how it's actually created a curve. Not perfect, but good enough. Good enough for my level of fussiness. Let's go back, set that to 30. All right. So that's how you can create an arch with the polyline. So it's an incredibly powerful tool for modeling. Let's go back to our star. Stars are pretty straightforward, but let's imagine for the moment that this was a 4-layer dumb RGB star. So it had 4 layers, or let's imagine it was a rope light star with 4 channels where you could turn on each layer 4 times. That makes things a little bit different. So for the first time, we're going to need to get into our string properties. And by default, everything so far I've been talking about pixel type things. But in this case, it's going to be a single color. I'm going to say single color intensity. That will react to any color when we start to drop effects on it. And now I also need to add some layers. Now I'm still going to say that there's a whole bunch of lights, Let's give myself a whole bunch of lights, like 200 lights. And now I need to tell it that there's actually 4 layers. And the way you do that is by defining 4 layer sizes. Now, because these are single channel lights, it really doesn't matter how many lights I put in each layer. So let's just put 50 in each. And you do that just by putting the number 50 4 times, separated by commas. I think. Oh, sorry. No, you don't. For a dumb channel star, you put 4 strings. And then maybe you do the 50s. All right, Gil, what am I doing wrong? You can tell I've never done a single. What am I doing wrong? All right, I'm not sure. You can tell I do pixel stars. We do a pixel star, demonstrate a similar concept. In this case, I have a single string, 50, oh, actually it's 60. Make it 60 pixels. In this case, we'll make it 30, 20, and 10 pixels, and I end up with a multi-layer star. That's how you do a multi-layer star in pixels. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here with these. If anyone else wants to chime in. Do single color, will it make it?
Never seen the layers in the single color.
Haven't you?
Maybe there's a problem with single color.
Yeah, I'm not sure. All right, so the other way, there is another way to do it, and that is, of course, to create multiple stars and just orientate them so they all have a common center, like so. And then define each one as a single string. The number of lights doesn't really matter, but you do need to come down here and set them to be a single color. And because these are often, if you're doing these with rope lights, you might have a red one, you might have a blue one. And so you would come down here and say, this one's actually, RGB nodes, single color. So come in here, set this to blue, and so forth. And so you could create your multi-layer single channel star that way. In my case, my pixel star happens to be a pixel star. All right.
Keith, does it matter that the strings are the same size?
No, it
is
shouldn't.
it rendering them over the top of each other?
No, it shouldn't matter. I have to have a look at that because I don't see a reason why that shouldn't work.
I just checked it. It looks like they're broken for single color.
Okay, we'll have to fix that, Gil. All right, so that's how you do a star, how you do a multi-layer star with pixels. Now, one of the things you'll notice then is I deleted that star that I'd created, and things have been going pretty well. We hadn't been getting any errors, but now all of a sudden we're getting errors. And if you come up here and look in the start channels, you've now got all of these start channels with stars in front of it. And that tells you that things are not good. Not good at all. So I'm going to flick back to the setup tab and back to the layout tab. Oh no, that didn't trigger the error. All right, let me.
If you hit save, the error should come up.
Will it? Okay.
I think so.
No, it didn't.
Or not.
Or not. Let's try dropping.
If you change
Okay, there we go. I just dropped something. Okay, so let's talk about what this is telling us and how we go about fixing it. So what it's saying is it couldn't calculate the start channel for a whole bunch of models. And that's true, it can't. It's showing them with these 3 stars here. And the reason it's happening is because there's missing models. By default, when you start dropping models down, Xlights tries to keep them all separate and on different channels so that they don't overlap. Overlapping channels are where you map a model to the same channel ranges on your controllers, and that leads to effects like things where you drop something onto one model and it appears on another model, and that's clearly something that you don't want to have happen. And the way you avoid that is you make sure that all of your models start on their own start channels and don't overlap at all. And by default, when you're dropping models, Xlights make sure that that's the case. But when you go and delete something, you break the chain. And so what we need to do is we need to look at these things that are broken and ask ourselves, well, what's missing? So in this case here, our polyline number 2 seems to be our problem because it's dependent upon star 1, or sorry, on star with no number after it. And there is no star with no number after it. And so we need to go back and fix that. And it seems that the chain is broken, that polyline 2 should probably be referring to polyline 1. So I dismiss this dialog. So I'm going to come back to polyline 2. And in the start channel here, I'm going to click on the ellipsis and I'm going to say the end of model is blank, which is a good sign that that's wrong. And I'm going to make it dependent upon polyline. And that seems to have fixed the chain. All of my stars have gone away. So I think I fixed my chain. We're all good again. All is good with the world. Now, they obviously aren't the right start channels. I've just been dropping things. We're going to need to go and map our models to our controllers at some point, which we will get to shortly. But let me finish off with a couple more models. If you're coming from law and you're actually pretty comfortable with just sequencing at the channel level, you can use the channel block model. So, you know, if I wanted to just map or just sequence 16 channels, you could just drop this channel block model down. It will give you 6 channels. You can even specify what color element is attached to each channel, which will help when you're sequencing. So that's a pretty simple way to sequence if you're used to just sequencing dumb elements and you don't really care what it looks like on the screen. If you do care what it looks like on the screen, you're probably going to start getting into the custom model. The custom model, you click it, you click and drag, you end up with this empty box. In order to actually paint an image, you're going to want to come into here where you get to specify exactly what your custom model looks like. You can make it bigger so you get a little bit more resolution. And you can click on the auto numbering here. We're not going to auto increment. This is just a dumb model, and we can just come around and click a bunch of places and make something that looks like our element. Now, this is going to be just a single channel dumb string element. I don't know, it's a bit abstract, but it'll do. And I come down here, make that single color red, and so now you have a model which is a custom shape. It's a single channel, so it's, you know, it's a wireframe or it's something like that, and it's as simple as that to create those sorts of models. You can also create a pixel element that's custom. Again, click drag, come to model data. Again, we'll make the grid a little bit bigger. In this case, I'm going to do auto numbering but do increments. And so I'm going to go around and click each time and it increments the number. And so I end up with a pixel element, which has a bunch more channels. As you can see up here, it's going from 524 to 553. So it has a bunch of channels, whereas this one here goes from 523 to 523. So it's a single channel element that we drew. Now that's pretty hard. So you probably don't want to have to go and draw, I don't know whether it's something you got from Boscoyo or Holiday Coro. You probably don't want to have to go and custom model those things. You can get yourself some XModel files, which are available on things like the Facebook files section and also in the Google Dropbox, which has been shared there, and you can download an XModel file and import that. And the way you would do that is you'd come over to this import button. Again, you would click and drag where you want your model to be. And in this case, of course, I forgot to. So let me quickly jump into my show folder. I think I've got one in here. Maybe I don't. Maybe I don't. There we go. Here's one I prepared earlier. Looks like a bit of a mess. It's because I video mapped it. It appears to need rotating too. We'll rotate it around. Okay, so here what I've managed to do is import an XModel file. You can still go and look at the data. The data's all in here. Numbers all over the place. So yeah, so you don't have to go and draw all your custom models manually. You can actually take advantage of what other people have done and
Hey Keith, could you mention where you can find some of these models at this point in time?
So as I said, they're in the file section on the Facebook group, or you can go to the you may be able to download them from your vendor's website, or you may be able to get them out of the Google Drive, which I can come back to later, go into that.
I shared the Google Drive there.
Oh, you did in
In
chat?
chat, yeah.
Okay, yeah, let me bring that up.
So one thing can you talk about, Keith, is something we end up helping a lot of people is, and you may be going there for that, you might want to do it with your mini tree, is when you have multiple elements of the same type and you want to align them on the layout screen.
Sure. All right, I can do that. Okay, so this is, this is the Google Drive. So if you come into here, there's a models section, and you can go in, choose your vendor. In this case, choose your holiday. And you can either get the official ones if they happen to exist, or you can grab your user-made ones where people have shared various models. The other thing that's included inside these models, if you use the XModel files, if they've gone to the trouble of submodeling them, i.e. mapping models within models, you'll be able to download those as well. All right, so copy and paste. Let's talk about copy and paste first. So as I said, I've actually got 10 of these damn trees. So I'm going to change this one's name. I'm going to call this mini tree 1. And now I want to go and create 10 of them. So I press Control C, or Command C, I would imagine it is on the Mac, and press Control V. It creates another one for me. Press another one, it creates another one for me. Another one, it creates another one for me. Let's just keep going. All right, looks good. How many did I get? 9? Yeah, I got 10. Be nice if that sorted properly, but it doesn't. Okay, so now I can click and drag and select all of those 10. And there's some things I can do. So one, I can right click here. I can distribute them horizontally and spread them out. I can then align them and align them to the bottom, which is kind of nice. Now, some people will select everything, come to here and find that the align menu is not enabled. And that's typically because you haven't actually selected anything. So I think if you, oh, actually, I know, I think I fixed that. So it does default to. So yeah, so aligning is as simple as selecting the align. You can align it horizontally, vertical. You can also do things like come here and say, actually, no, the mini tree is actually that large. If I hold the Shift key down and click, is it Shift or Control? Sorry, it's Control, and click on the model and make sure that's the selected one. If I right click and I come into here and I say resize, and I can say match in the size, and it will bring all my trees up and it will make them the same size. So there's a few shortcuts that are hidden in there to make your life a little bit easier and faster. So hopefully that covers that off. The rest of the stuff, look, I probably won't go through the rest. There's Arches models and candy cane models and the like. Moving head models is a bit of an advanced topic, or just general DMX models. You would also use this for things like smoke machines and spots and things like that. And Gil's got some good videos that he's done on how to configure those. Similar with icicles. Useful for doing across your eaves and that sort of stuff, and spinners and the like. But that's probably the bulk of the models, how to set them up, how to configure them. The manual, although the manual's getting a little long in the tooth right now, it still does a reasonable job of talking about the model properties. You can, like I said, at pretty much any time, select the model, right click on it and bring up that wiring view, so you can see what the wiring actually looks like on the model. You can see I didn't wire this one neatly, did I? That's useful, particularly when it comes time to start punching pixels through the back of Coro, etc. Yeah, it's nice to have a map of it. I always recommend that you build the model in Xlights first before you go out and build your model. And the reason for that is what you will find if you don't is you'll go and make some crazy decision like, you know, I'm going to start in the middle. Because it just happens to be easier for me to start wiring my matrix in the middle. So I'm going to start in the middle and go out, and then I'm going to start in the middle and go out this way, and that makes life easy. Well, it makes it easy for you to wire it, but it sure as hell won't make it easy for you to model it in Xlights and get it to work right. It's generally speaking easier to work out how to get it into Xlights and then go and do your build. You'll have a lot less pain, and your configuration will go a lot more smoothly.
That goes for like pre-built models. When it comes to if you're building your own custom model, technically however you wire it, you can build it as a custom model.
Yeah, you can. And look, that's particularly true with things like, you know, if you're buying one of these Coro elements and you've downloaded one of these Xmodel files, those Xmodel files are only valid if you happen to wire things the way in which that Xmodel file's been designed. If you wire it differently, then that Xmodel file, while the pixels might be in the right places, the numbers will be all wrong. And when you try to sequence it, it's going to look wrong. So you do need to pay attention to your Xmodel file when you go to wire those props. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is actually tie our elements together to our controllers. So if you remember when we were doing our setup tab at the beginning, we defined a bunch of universes across these two controllers, and now we need to tie our models to those controllers. Now, maybe this is the point in time where we go and we talk about universes and channels and what all those things are, because I know that creates a lot of confusion for new people. So the way I want you to think about things, let's start by thinking about things using these channels here. So these are what we call absolute channels. If someone talks about absolute channels, they're referring to these numbers here. And you can see they start at 1 and they just increment all the way through to the end. And I've defined 16,360 channels. So think of your absolute channels like a really, really long road. It's Route 66. It goes all the way across the states. And we've decided we're going to number every house. So we're going to start in, I don't know, LA, and we're going to put house number 1 there. And then we're going to go from there all the way to I don't know, where's Route 66 finish? But all the way to the end to house 16,360. And therefore, let's imagine every one of those houses has got a porch light, and that porch light can be turned on or off. And you can put a different color bulb in each porch light. And if I turn on full intensity, channel 5,121, then the porch light on house 5,121 turns on. And that's absolute addressing. Every house has a unique address all the way along the road. Now the problem with that is it's obviously it's a very, very long way. And what happens if we start to build extra houses in the middle? Well, we end up having to go around and renumber everything. So if I suddenly decide that, hey, my Falcon 4 here, it actually can deal with more universes than this, and I'm going to add some extra elements. So I come in here and I say, actually, I want to insert universe 121. So I go in here and go 192.168.0.125, start at universe, what are we up to, 120. Not one universe, 512 channels, still my F4, looks good. Right, our E682 first universe was 10,241, but now it's 10,753. So now we have to drive along our long road and renumber all the houses. A very, very painful activity, and consequently leads to people leaving a whole bunch of gaps in their channels just in case they want to allocate things later. But there is a better way. And the better way is to actually take advantage of this universes. So let's imagine for a moment that instead of numbering all our houses sequentially, which we still have a sequential number, let's imagine that every town along Route 66 we decided to give a separate unique number to. So LA is 100. I don't know, pick another town along the way, and we're going to give that a town number of 101, 102. So these are our universe numbers. And then within that town, we can have up to, in this case, 512 houses. And so that's how you break it up. So now, when I come to house 2049 along the road, we could also refer that to as town 104, house 1, because it's the first house inside town 104, which happens in this case to be house 2049. Now the beauty of this is that when we refer to down here our first 682 channel, which is house, it was in town 200 and start channel 1, when we inserted this extra town with an extra 512, this address here didn't change. It's still 200 first house. So although the absolute changed, this relative address doesn't change. And so that's the power of using universes and start channels as a way of defining the address of your house. Because it doesn't matter when they suddenly go to the middle of Kentucky and start adding a whole bunch of extra towns. My addresses in the Northeast, which are going to be much higher than that, aren't going to change if I use a universe and a start channel as a way of referring to those houses. So I don't know whether that analogy confuses people more, but that's the concept. And you can easily see the mapping here, because I know that universe 202 start channel 1, at this particular point in time is this absolute channel 11773. So when it comes time to take our models and put them onto our controllers, let's imagine that I want to put something onto my E682. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to here, and this tree here, I'm going to put this onto my E682. So I come down to my start channel here and click on my ellipsis, and I know that my 682 starts on universe 200, and I'm going to put it on the first channel in universe 200. Now I don't need to put the IP address in. I could, but I don't need to, because this universe number is unique. So you don't have to put an IP address if the universe is unique, and they should be unique. It's the best practice to do so. And I click OK. And so now my tree starts on universe 200, start channel 1. It happens to map to that absolute address of 10,753, which is exactly what it is here. Now again, if I come in here and I insert after and add another E131, unicast 192.168.0.125, starting universe, what are we up to? 121. We're adding another 512, and we're onto our F4. Okay, so all of a sudden that universe, its start address has changed to 11265. And when I come back to the layout and I click on my tree, what do you know? 11265. its absolute channel has changed because the address here was fixed to the universe and start channel. Really, really powerful way to minimize the amount of maintenance that you have to do in your show. Now, when it comes to your next element on this particular controller, let's imagine the matrix was also on this controller. So there's a couple of options that I have. My preferred approach, I know it's not everyone's, but my preferred approach is to start each element on its own new universe. And so in this case, I can see that this tree here happens to finish on universe 202 channel 6. So I'm going to start this one here on universe 203. So universe number 203, start channel 1. And if I click on the column up here, I can sort things. I think. Yeah, that did sort things. Okay, so I've got lots of overlaps here at the moment. That's okay, we're going to fix that up. So this one here started on universe 200, it finished on universe 202. This one here starts on 203 and finishes on 208. So they don't overlap, they're all good. So that's how I would define those start channels there. The mini trees are interesting. With the mini trees, let's put these onto our Falcon. So I'm going to put this one onto universe 100 start channel 1. And in this case, let's imagine that these things are actually all wired together one after another. So mini tree 2 is actually wired to the end of mini tree 1. So I actually quite like the model chaining in that example. And what I would do is I would put it at the end of mini tree 1. And it's the first channel after the mini tree 1, so that should be a 1 as well. And now I have mini tree 1, followed by mini tree 2, followed by mini tree 3, and you can see it goes to channel 102, it goes then to channel 103, goes to channel 104, and so on up. And so it's all very neatly wired together and finishes on universe 101, start channel 508. So that's a very easy way to set those start channels up. All right. Let's go and let's talk about, well, let's do it with our mini trees. So the other thing that I like to do is it's actually possible in Xlights to document how you've actually connected all of these mini trees up to your controller. In this case, it's the controller connection property. So this happens to be an F4, so it has 4 pixel outputs. And what I can do is I can come into here and I can describe the type of pixel. In this case, it's a 2811 pixel, and I'm going to plug it into port 1. Now, as I said, all of these trees are actually plugged into one another, so they're all daisy chained together, if you like. So all of them happen to have a controller connection which is the same, and you can very quickly do that by cutting and pasting like that, or you can right click on this and go to bulk edit, controller connection, and yep, 2811 port 1 done. So that tells Xlights that you will find all of these trees connected to port 1 on my Falcon 4, and it's as simple as that. Now I'm going to go and delete some models because having a whole bunch of models here that aren't configured correctly is just going to cause some grief, as you can see. So let's go and delete all these things that we aren't using. All right. That's right. I think it's because I'm locked. Unlock. Delete. All right. Okay. So now we've only got those things that we've actually configured on our controllers. A quick way to check whether all of your models don't overlap is to run the check sequence process. It takes a second or two, and then it will pop up a report, which is over here on my other screen, which comes through, and one of the things that it tells me here is that I have no overlapping model channels. If I was to go in and add a star and put it on channel 1 like that, and I was to go back and rerun that check sequence, you'll see that this is actually on the same channel as that first mini tree. And so now it's come up and it's telling me that, hey, there's an overlap between mini tree 1 and the star, and also mini tree 2 and the star. And that would generally speaking, be a problem. You wouldn't want that. I will delete that. Okay, so that's setting start channels on models. Why I use universe and start channel as the way to do addressing, and how you set up your controller configuration. Now, we haven't set the controller configuration on the tree over here. We can do that as well. Again, we can put that one on port 1, and we can put this one. Now, I'm going to put this one on port 2, but something else I want to show you. So we'll put this on port 2. But you'll find that this is actually not just using port 2. If I come in and do the node layout, right click and do the node layout, notice that how it tells me my controller connections it's using are actually controller connections 2 through 4. And the reason it's doing that is because when we defined this matrix, we said that this had 3 strings. So 3 strings means 3 connections to the controller. So if it starts on controller connection 2, it's assuming that it then goes and uses 3 and 4 as well in order to have those 3 connections to the controller. The same thing would happen if I defined my megatree with multiple strings. It would assume that it was using multiple ports on the controller. Now, why go to the trouble of putting the controller connection in? Well, the reason is with certain controllers, we actually support the ability to upload the configuration to the controller. So let's go over and bring up our Falcon 4. Now, this is a brand new Falcon 4, straight out of the box. In fact, it's still got the phone backing on it. It's got nothing configured other than the defaults. So it's all configured to listen to Universe 1 and so forth, which obviously is not the universes that I'm using. Now, because we've followed all the rules, we can actually come into here, click on one of the Falcon universes, right click on it, upload to controller, E131 input definition to the Falcon, and do the upload. We'll just say yes, and down here it tells you that it's complete. And if I go back to my Falcon and I refresh it, we find that the Falcon is now listening to the universes that we're using. Starts at universe 100, goes down to universe 121. You don't have to type all those numbers in. There's no chance that you've made any errors. The configuration is uploaded. The second thing that we have to do is we have to tell the Falcon about those mini trees. Again, it's just got the default configuration here, and that's not appropriate. So again, we can come here, right click, upload to controller, output definition to the Falcon, yes, and it uploads it. And if we come back and refresh it on the Falcon, let's have a look at what it's done. So you can see that for port number 1, because that's what we said our mini trees were connected to, it's got a description of mini tree 1 because that was the first model on that. It's on universe 100 start channel 1. Well, we can verify that by coming back to our layout and checking whereabouts our mini tree starts. And yes, it's on universe 100 start channel 1. And there's 340. Why 340 pixels? Well, because each of these mini trees has 34 pixels, and I said 10 of them were all on. Right, let's go over to number 9. This is all of them are on port 1 on that controller. So it's worked out that there were 10 of them, so it's 340 pixels. Okay, and it really is as simple as that. to do an upload. And if I was to turn the Falcon on, or if I was to attach the lights to the Falcon right now, I could start to send data to the Falcon knowing that that configuration is correct. Now, the SAN devices, a little bit more complicated, but in this case, it's listening to universes 1 through 12. That's clearly not right, because we've said, actually, no, we're sending universes 200 through to 211. So let's go and upload the E131 definition to the SAN devices. And this one's always a bit of a lottery, but it may work. We'll refresh it. Okay, it worked. Okay, so here it is, listening to universes 200 through 211. But we haven't uploaded the output definition yet. I think you have to upload that separately. You do. Then we'll upload our tree and our matrix, if you remember rightly. And we'll refresh it again. And so here it's gone through and it's put our tree and it's put our matrix. I think that's right. Maybe not. 342 pixels, 864 pixels. That sounds right. So yeah, so that's how you can upload your configurations to your controllers and save you the trouble of going in and manually configuring it. There are some rules you need to follow. There are circumstances where it's not supported. If you've got a custom model and you've got multiple connections back to your controller, unfortunately, we don't support uploading those. If you've got 2 controllers running a single tree, well, once again, we don't support the uploading to those. But if you follow the rules of either multiple models on one output or consecutive outputs used to drive one model, you will be all good. The upload will generally work if you configure it correctly.
What about, Keith, those of us who prefer to do the folds in the controller? And then does that break the upload?
If you do the folds in the controller, does that break the upload?
It probably does. I haven't tried it.
It probably does. My assumption would be that it does. The upload also doesn't particularly like virtual strings either. So that gets a bit problematic. You can do things, however, like I can go here and change this brightness down. I can even change the pixel order here. And I can still upload to the controller. The upload will not overwrite these properties. It will leave them as whatever you decided to make them. It will never overwrite them. So it is actually safe. I do go through and set brightness on my controllers, and then I redo the upload knowing that it's not going to trash it. It'll still be current.
Something interesting I saw on the 682, it looked like you had a stock config on there, and when they come from the factory there, each of the outputs has a different pixel type. It looks like it set them all to 2811 after you did the upload.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was interesting. I caught that.
Well, actually, that's the wrong one. It's this one. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, because this is the one I loaded earlier, and this is the one I loaded now. So yeah, I'm not sure.
An end universe of 0.
Yeah, probably because it's I don't know. Is that too many? That's probably too many pixels. That's because it's probably too many pixels for a SAN devices. I don't think it accepts. I think it maxes out at 680 or even 340, doesn't it? 680. If I set that at 680, would it work? I don't know.
I think for SAN devices, you need to divide that number by 3. You're using
No, there
3
is.
outputs.
No. It was too high. When I set it to 680, it updated correctly. Although the universe number is a bit strange.
Okay. Yeah, I guess as long as you do have that many per string.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I wasn't particularly careful in that configuration, so I don't swear that was right. Okay. What else was I going to cover that I haven't so far covered? Did I confuse everyone with my universe start channel analogy? Do I need to go back and reattempt that? Have I not done enough on single channel models? All right. Well, if no one's got any questions, let me go through and talk through some of the other things that people asked me to cover. How are we doing for time? Almost an hour and a half. All right. People asked about troubleshooting when it all doesn't work, and this is very common, right? Lots and lots of posts from people saying it doesn't work. So first of all, I would emphasize that if it doesn't work and you're at the end of your tether, you've tried everything and it doesn't work, and you choose to post it to the forum, posting to a forum saying it doesn't work is a garbage post. It doesn't help. No one knows how to start, and all it means is someone's going to write back to you and say, can you post some images, can you post your configuration, etc. Please think about the community when you make a post that something doesn't work, with the sorts of information that are likely going to be required in order for us to troubleshoot and help you. We all want to help you get going. On top of getting my show running every year, I'm really keen that your show gets running as well. And so is a lot of other people in the community. So please take the time and the effort and give everyone the respect they deserve by taking the effort to make sure that you publish the information that people can use to work out what's wrong with your configuration. So what should you publish? Well, at a minimum, so if it's not working, first of all, start with one model. Pick a model that's not working and say, let's try and troubleshoot that. Because if you can get one model working, you can probably get the rest working. So the first thing you want to do is get a screen print with all of these properties here, so that people can see how you configured your model and what start channel you set in particular. Okay, that's going to be the first thing that you're going to want to make sure you screen printed and posted. The second thing is screen print and post the relevant part of this here, so that we can see your universe and your start channel. We can see the IP address. We can see which absolute channels, so that we can cross-reference the two and make sure that that looks sensible. The next thing that you want to do is come over to your controller, go to the E131 ArtNet screen, and give us that screen as well. Come on. I need that new firmware, Dave. Come on. There it is. I need this screen as well, because I want to see that the universes here are correct. Now, my personal belief is I don't care how you've configured your Falcon, you should be uploading this configuration. There is absolutely no configuration that you can do on the Falcon that the X-Lights cannot upload this for you, and you should always upload this particular, the input side of it. But yes, include that screen print, and then include the string ports screen print. And if your problem is with one of your serial connected elements, please include this one as well. Okay, and if your problem also involves FPP, then obviously the relevant E131 configuration on FPP should also be shared. If you share all of those images, I reckon a good 75% people will look at that data on the screen and work out what your problem is and direct you specifically to the problem. I would also suggest that you take advantage of the Zoom number and the Zoom session. If you post there and say, look, I'm happy to jump into Zoom, almost certainly someone's going to ping back and say, yeah, happy to be there, what time? And you can jump in and someone will actually walk you through and get it working. That's from a configuration post perspective. But what about the actual troubleshooting itself? So I guess when it all doesn't work, the first thing you want to do is start with your controller test. Pretty much every controller these days includes a test mode here. Click on the test mode, click the set button, and get the controller pumping data out to the lights. If your lights do not light up when the controller is in test mode, your problem is on the controller. And it's one of two things. You've either wired it in some way incorrectly, you've wired your power incorrectly, you've wired your data incorrectly, you've put your data wire into the clock pin, you've undervolted the bulbs, something like that. Or in your string port definition for your bulbs, you said, you said 34 here instead of 340, and that's why only 34 of the lights light up or something like that. So if you can't get it working here in test mode, directly off the controller, then your problem is on your controller configuration, not in X-Lights and not in FPP. However, if the controller test mode is working, all the lights are lighting up, then there's going to be a slightly different problem. And the next thing I would look at is the packet count down here. So these are all nicely 0. But if I come over to X-Lights and just turn on output to lights, and I come back here to the Falcon, and I take it out of test mode, one of the things I expect to see is these numbers going up. And I expect to see all of the numbers going up to indicate that actually this is right. If I come over here, turn output to lights off, and if I delete a bunch of universes, save it, and I turn output to lights on, and I come back to the Falcon, and I see this where the numbers up here are going up, but the numbers down here aren't going up, or maybe they're still 0. That's a sure sign that there's a misconfiguration between X-Lights and the Falcon. You're just not sending data to it. Now, if the configuration here looks okay, you've checked the IP address, you can open the controller, etc., and the data's still not arriving, then you may have a networking issue where the data is going out a different network card on your PC. So maybe you have a Wi-Fi connection and a wired connection to your controller. You know, I disabled my Wi-Fi connection and check to see whether that helps. Those sorts of, that sort of troubleshooting. If you can see the data arriving here, but your lights still aren't working, then you almost certainly have some sort of model mapping issue where you've set your model up and you haven't defined it on the right universes. So at that point, I would be coming back here, and I would be going to my models, and I would be double clicking on them, checking up here on my start channel definition, and you'll find if you click on the model here, it says that model starts on universe 200, channel 1, and I'd be making sure that universe 200 was here. It's not. Oh, what a surprise, that model's not actually outputting to that controller. I'm clearly not sending that to the controller. So that's where I'd go at that point. At that point in time, it can also be useful to come up to Tools Test. And here you can do a couple of things. You can go and just highlight all of these rows here. Click, oh, sorry. If you highlight them all and press the space bar, it'll output to all of those, and you can see whether the lights start to come up on the controller. If those lights now light up on the controller, but when you deselect it all and you come down to the model and you click on your tree and the lights don't light up, then it's a sure sign that all that data is getting to the controller's handling it correctly, but there's something wrong with your mapping of your tree. And then you can do things like come here and just turn on one universe at a time until you see your tree light up, and then you can begin to realize, well, hang on, there's something funky going on there. It's actually on a different universe than I expected or something. So there are a whole bunch of tools here that can help you troubleshoot the lights. It's just a matter of systematically working on it. If you then say, well, actually, no, it's all working in X-Lights, but it's not working in either Xschedule or on FPP, then there's a further set of troubleshooting that you need to do there, but I'm not going to go there today. So that's troubleshooting. I did offer to provide some resources. So for those that have never been to videos.xlights.org, you're really missing out. This is our attempt to collect together the huge number of videos that are on X-Lights, we've curated it to some degree in that we've dropped videos or not included videos which were dated. The problem is of course, X-Lights does move on. Every week or two, there's a new version of X-Lights coming out with a new feature. We occasionally rework features, and that can leave you quite confused if you're using old videos to try and understand what's going on. So yeah, so videos.xlights is a great source. You can see the videos that are popular. These here are posted in the order of publishing. So you can see the more recent ones here. Strongly suggest you go there. So what are my top 10? My top 10 videos, and this is not necessarily going to be easy to find. So I'm going to mention them by name and let you find them later, I think. I'm trying to work out, see how far back do I have to go. So I know Sean did an introductory video which he called Introduction to X-Lights. If you go into Getting Started, this Introduction to X-Lights video, which I posted, but I believe it's actually Sean that does the presentation in it. If you're brand new to X-Lights, I would start with one of Sean's videos. He goes through things really systematically. He orientates it around getting you going. Not necessarily the jump around that I've done where I kind of have leapt from sort of topic to topic. A much more systematic walkthrough. Would strongly recommend that for a new user. Some other videos that I like, I'm a big fan of Shane's video on show design. For me, this is all about, he talks about the art of sequencing basically and how to approach lighting your lights up and taking a song and turning it into something. I find this is a really, really good video. Importing sequences, importing an X-Light sequence. This is a video of mine. It's the most popular. This goes, if you've bought a sequence from Lilia or Ron, or you've grabbed one of Logan's free ones or one of the other ones that someone shared, strongly recommend you watch this video. This video particularly talks about a whole bunch of tips and tricks for making sure that it comes in perfectly, that the images all work, etc. Definitely watch that video, take notes. There are some real important pieces of information in there you don't want to get wrong. Cleaning up your X-Light setup and layout. This was a video I did last year which talked about, and in fact I did an example where I took someone's layout from the prior year and helped convert it across to Universe and Star Channel, get away from Absolute and clean up a whole bunch of problems in the way they'd laid their show out. So that reinforces some of the things that I've gone over today. A new way to sequence AC lights. So if you're coming from the law world and you've got a bunch of AC lights and you're kind of struggling with the way X-Light sequences them, this goes through and shows you a feature that Gil and I worked on to try to make AC light sequencing in X-Lights a similar experience to the one you would be familiar with in Law or Vixen 2 if you're still using that. Configuring Falcon controllers from X-Lights. This is a slightly older but more comprehensive run through of the process for configuring those Falcon controllers using the uploads. I talk more extensively in that video about the traps that you can fall into, etc. There is an X schedule walkthrough video, this one here. This one goes for an hour. This was another one of these sort of seminars that I did just before Christmas when everyone was setting their schedules up, and I did a really exhaustive walkthrough of that. Definitely worth a view just before you go to play your show, probably something you'll get to in October or November. Any of the feature update videos. So on a regular basis, I put out feature update videos. I did a couple of them last week. I did 2 because I was covering a whole bunch of versions. So I split out the X-Lights video from the X-Schedule video. These things go through and cover all of the features that were released in those various releases, and they're a great way to stay up to date with the changes in X-Lights as it goes along. Along the way, you'll no doubt come across things which are, you know, little gems that are hidden away. So they're definitely worth watching. And if you keep up to date with them, it's not too bad. If you try to watch them in bulk, I think it would do your head in. It'd do my head in. The fresh install of X-Lights 2030. So this is a little bit dated in that it's based on 2030, but to be honest, it doesn't really impact on that video. This is one of Clyde's videos. Where is it? Okay. We'll go back to our getting started video category again and see if it's in there. Here it is, fresh install of X-Lights 2030. So this goes through, you know, the basics of setting up X-Lights, but more importantly, it also talks through how to go and set Audacity up so that you can, all the Vamp plugins up so that you can generate timing marks out of your audio. So that's definitely worth a watch as well. And there's another one of Clyde's that I love. And I have no idea where this one will be. I have absolutely no idea where this one will be. It's obviously not popular.
Keith,
Yeah.
one other thing that I'd like for you to touch on, if you would, for the newer converts over to X-Lights, is show them how to add a background image when you're drawing a custom model.
Sure, I can. All right. So here's another one. Oh my God, X-Lights keeps crashing. What the hell? Why won't they fix it? I really appreciate if everyone spent a little bit of time watching Clyde's video, because in it he basically talks to best practices around helping us understand what the problem is. I think too many people just let the crashes go by and assume someone will just fix it, and you know that does happen. But you guys can really help by making sure that you report things to us and report things the right way, and help us keep the software stable and working. This one's also good, Piskel. I didn't find that one, but that's got nothing to do with X-Lights, but Piskel is a tool that lets you draw the sorts of animations that you've seen Logan draw on his tree. Yeah, if you want to see how he drew the TIE fighter, etc., that's the software he used. You can also go and directly subscribe to my YouTube channel. Clyde, Gil, all those guys have got YouTube channels and they publish videos, and you can subscribe to them and get notifications when they upload stuff. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of good stuff there, and there's a whole bunch of good YouTube channels out there as well. Great Scott's great. EV blog I enjoy. So that's the top 10 videos. If you're brand new to lighting entirely, then if you go to the Oz Christmas Lighting website, because the Aussies really know how to do stuff, they have a 101 manual. Now you'll have to sign up to the site to gain access to it. And it's a PDF which you can download, and this goes through all the basics of lights. It will tell you about what IP68 versus 67 is. It will talk to you about dumb RGB versus smart pixels. It will talk to you about controllers, power, all sorts of things. It's a great starting point. The manual I know is being updated at the moment, so there'll be a new version out sometime in the first half of this year, hopefully sooner than that. But it's a great place to start and get a good introduction to a lot of the technology that underpins the hobby that we're all doing. Okay, is there anything else I wanted to go over? All right, I'll deal with Mike's custom model question. Problem is I don't have any images. But if you're, one of the things that's kind of nice if you're doing a custom model, if you're doing a custom model and you're coming in and you're faced with this grid, knowing where to put the pixels is kind of hard. So one of the things that you can do, and I don't have an appropriate images. One of the things you can do is you can come out here to this background image property, and Gil, I still think we should be able to set that within the model data dialog. It would be so much easier. But one of the things that you can do here is you can go and find a model image, and I don't have a model image, so I'm just going to use my house. And you can set a background image for that custom model. That background image has got nothing at all to do with the custom model itself. But what it does allow you to do is when you go into the custom model dialog, it will actually take that image and underlay it under the grid. Okay, and then what you can do is you can come here and you can dim it down. I thought. Oh, there it is. It just takes a little bit of time. And then when it comes time to actually put the thing in, you can then follow the, let's do the house outline. Not that you do it with a custom model this way, but you can use the image as a guide to decide which cells you want to put the numbers in. Probably a bit out of place. Click OK. So there you go. There's my custom model using that image as a background. So that's that one, Mike. So that was all I really planned on going over. I am more than happy to take questions. And if I can't answer them, I'm almost certain there is someone on this call who can. If there's something that's burning, if there's something that you're really struggling with and you just want to ask, by all means, reach out. Now, I haven't covered any advanced topics. I haven't talked about submodels and faces and all of that sort of stuff. There are really good videos on videos.xlights that go over all of those concepts and more. They are all reasonably categorized here. If you go into this menu, if you wanted to see if you wanted to do singing faces, I think that's under sequencing. There it is, singing faces. There's a bunch of videos here on doing Papagayo and the like. There's even a video here that Tom uploaded, which is about taking an audio track and isolating out the voices so that it's easier to hear the voices, so that when it comes time to do the Papagayo track, it's easier. There's also a bunch of, and these are getting a bit dated now, but there were a bunch of videos that I did a while back for the Aussie forum, which went through pretty much Xlights back to back. I actually think they're in the webinar category itself rather than the Oz. Maybe they're not. Yeah, I don't remember. But flick through, find a video that interests you. There's so much video, you could be watching this for the rest of the year and get no sequencing done. There's plenty there. So no questions. I answered everything, or everyone's just too scared to talk.
You have a question there, Keith, about how the layout of a prop will impact the display. It's a good question.
How will the layout of a prop impact the display? Can someone clarify what they actually mean by that?
I interpret that as if you said did bars, for example, and you put the model on the wrong side of the yard and you wonder why it's lighting up out of order. Is that what you mean, Dave? Let me see. I'll unmute.
Run on the front and then runs forward and then back. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, this is Dave. Yeah. So this year I tried to lay out some pixels like along the front of, say, my garage, and then sort of going back along the garage. And what I found was if I did like a bars or something, it didn't show right, or a marquee. But what I ended up doing is just straightening it out on the layout, and then it worked. But I just don't understand how that layout, how that impacted that display.
Sure. Okay, I get the question. Okay, so there's a couple of concepts here I'd like to cover. So one is what happens. So I've taken my photo here slightly on an angle, so you can see across the top of the arch, and then you can see down the side here where the lights go back into the house. But what if I'd taken the photo front on, and these lights were, I still wanted to put lights here, but they were either very small. Like take this fence. This fence is a quick conversion, about 110 feet long, right? So it's a long fence, but it's all very, very compressed. And so, you know, doing lights when, you know, you've got this 3D to it can be a little bit difficult. So there's a couple of things that you can do. I know that, let's imagine this was square on. And I was drawing a set of lights across here, and let's imagine that the house then went straight back. So there was no actual visibility of those lights. So one of the things that some people do is that they will draw a line up like this, and it's not how it looks on the house, but it at least makes sure that there is some space between the start and the end point when they're sequencing. Now, the thing to understand. So let me save that. I'm going to go and sequence this. Let's go and create a sequence. What do I call that? Single line 2. So let's go and put a bars effect on single line 2. It would help if I had single line 2. So one of the things you need to understand is how render buffers are created, because how Xlights draws on your particular thing makes all the difference in the world to how it looks. So if I set this as per preview, right, you get a bar that goes across it. The problem is this doesn't look very good. So hang on, let me go back to layout. Let me add a group. And I'm going to put that line in it. Single line 2. Save. All right. All right. So I'm going to drop it on the group because it's a little bit clearer. Because the default. So you can see here when you do the bars effect that the bars is actually, let me go back. Let me put single line in as well. All right. So you can see that the bar is behaving quite differently. Now these bars are actually bars that are going up, and so it's drawing on it as if this was a grid where it starts at the bottom and it just draws it going up, and that's because the render style here is set per preview. There are, however, other render styles. So one render style is single line. And what it's done is it's actually taken this model, flattened it down, put it alongside this model, and it's just drawing up, which means it's a single line, so it just changes color. If I was to move that to right, you would see that it's much more just following along. And if I went back to my layout here and was to take this thing and to make it more vertical, might show it a little bit better. Redo the render. So you can see that because it's single line, it's still moving across both models at the same speed, even though this one is quite vertical and this one is quite horizontal. Whereas if I change it to per preview, what you'll find is it goes quite slowly across here, but quite quickly up here. And that's because it's actually drawing the bars vertically all the way up and sliding it across, and because this is quite narrow on the x-axis, it moves very quickly across it. And so the shape of the underlying render buffer has a major impact on how the effect looks on the model. And so changing these render styles can have a dramatic impact. And so one way to get away from these things is to use those appropriate render buffers depending on what you want to do. The mini trees here are another classic example. Let me grab a mini tree and drop a bars on it, because this will show it quite distinctly. So here's a mini tree. The bars are going to the right. Let's make them go up. Right. So you can see how the bars are going up, and at any point in time, the bar is actually horizontal across the model. The bars model is not actually following the tree. So if I change this to single line, and I have to do it to the right because of the way the single line model works, you can see now that the lights actually go across and backwards and forwards, because now what it's done is it's stretched this model out and made it a single line, and it's drawing the bars across that single line. Understanding the way in which the render buffers are created underneath the models and all of these options really opens up some of the power of X-Lights, and it's one of the reasons why. So for instance, I was to grab the marquee and drop it on a mini tree with the default render mode. Oh, did that take? On default, per preview, sorry. That's the one I wanted. That makes no sense at all. I mean, why aren't all the lights lighting up? Well, the reason is because by default, the buffer here is the rectangle that the model sits on. So only the bulbs that are on the very outside of the model are going to be lit up, which happens to be the top one, the rightmost one, and in this case, the bottom leftmost one. And they're the only pixels that light up. Whereas if I change it to the single line, the marquee lights all the pixels up, because what it's done is it's flattened the buffer out into being a single line. And the single line, every single pixel is the bottommost pixel, so every single pixel gets drawn on by the marquee. If I change that back to per preview and I start playing with the is it thickness? Thickness, here it is. You will see as I increase the thickness, it comes in from the edge and starts to light the pixels up. All right. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how those buffers work.
If you drop that on your matrix, it'll probably show them a little better, because I use that effect a lot on my outline.
So yeah, when it's on my matrix, that's what it looks like. When it's on my mini tree, that's what it looks like. The difference between the matrix is per preview and default are pretty much the same, just the scale slightly different. And single line would of course light up every pixel because it flattened every pixel in that matrix out into a really long single line model. So hopefully that answered the question. Matthew, Dave, yes?
Yes, thank you. Now, at the risk of opening Pandora's box, can you talk just a little bit about what's the definition of the render buffer, actually?
So behind the scenes, everything, X-Lights always draws on a grid, okay? And then that grid has the pixels mapped into it. And so the easiest one to think of is a matrix. The matrix, the grid, is exactly the size of the matrix, and every point in the grid has one pixel in it. It's pretty straightforward. Tree is exactly the same, or at least a regular tree is exactly the same. It creates this buffer, which is as many wide as there are strands, as many high as each strand is long, and that's what it draws on. Okay, when you've got something like this custom model here, it creates a render buffer that is, not surprisingly in this case, putting that background image slows it down, 25 wide by 25 high. And that's what it draws on. And so when you put a bars effect going up, the bar starts down here and it goes up line by line by line. Eventually, it goes across the top of pixels 1 and 2, and so it lights them up. And then it goes across 3 and 4 and it lights them up. And then it goes up one more line and it doesn't light anything up. Then it goes to 5 and it lights it up. Then it's 6 and it lights it up. And so as the bar moves across, it hits each pixel and it lights that pixel up. And that's what's being done in the background. When you do per preview, it's like we've drawn one of these imaginary grids over the preview. So when I did a per preview on these 2 lines, it drew an imaginary grid around these 2 lines and it rendered onto it. And so when we're doing the bars going up, it would hit this first line and it would hit every pixel at once. And so that whole line would turn red. And then it would start to draw on the pixels here and slide its way all the way up. That's how Xlights works behind the scene. When I just take these 2 models and I say, I want to turn that into a single line model, what it does is it creates a grid which is 1 pixel high, but really long, with 1 pixel in each line, all spread out. And that's what Xlights draws on. And then the effects just draw onto that grid. So every effect up here, all it sees is a grid with a slightly different size. If you take the butterfly, if I was to go here, right, everyone knows the butterfly, right? Let's grab a butterfly. So that's single line, default. Okay, the bottom left-hand pixel in the butterfly is always red. Okay, if I was to go here and create a new single line model, and I was to say that it was only 1 node long, right? It's called single line 3. And I can create a new sequence because I'm lazy. And I was to go down to that model and I was to drop a butterfly on it. What do you think is going to happen? Well, think about it. What's the grid sitting behind this single line 3? Well, it's a matrix, but the matrix is 1 wide by 1 high. And so when the butterfly gets dropped on it, and you can probably barely see it, I probably need to go back to my layout and change that model, and I'll increase the pixel size to 22, make it a nice big circle. I'll go back to the sequencer, right? What do you know when I drop the butterfly on it? It's red. And why is it red? Well, it's red because the bottom left-hand pixel on a butterfly is always red. And so this pixel will always stay red. If I drop a bars effect on it, it'll just flick backwards and forwards between the colors that are selected. There you go. It's a bit slow because of the length of this effect and the cycles and whatever. It'll be a bit faster now. So every effect is just rendering on that grid, and then there's some smarts behind the scenes which are mapping that grid to the pixels. Now, if you set up a group that includes your whole house, when you define the group, let's go up to our group up here. This setting here defines how big that grid is. So in this case, it's going to create the smallest grid it can that will not exceed 400 by 400 in size. That will be the grid that sits behind the group that sits behind these 2 lines. Okay, if you said make it as per preview, it's going to create a grid that is across the entire display, right, with these pixels only in it. And so that's going to be a very large grid. And you know, if you were doing something like a morph, you know, the morph would start over here, for instance, and there'd be a lot of blackness. Nothing would be going on, nothing would be going on. And then when the morph finally hit the edge of the model, stuff would start to happen. And then it would get to the end and then it would stop. So how you create the underlying buffer has a massive impact on how things appear in Xlights. And it's one of the things that as you develop your skills and your understandings, you begin to understand layers, you begin to understand submodels, you begin to understand the render buffers. That's how you see some of these effects that people publish and what they look like. And you know, you wonder how the hell do they do that? Well, they do that by having a really good understanding of what Xlights is doing behind the scenes.
That was a great description. Thank you for that.
I see Mike Purser has his hands up. Did you have something, Mike?
Yeah, I was wondering. I have a Snowman wireframe that I converted from ICANN's mini lights to nodes. It's got 96 nodes on it. And I was trying to use the liquid effect to make it look like you were building the snowman from its start channel and its end channel are right next to each other at the very bottom. And I was hoping to use the liquid effect to make it look like you were building the snowman from the ground up. And I never got it to show me that effect. What am I doing wrong? If it's too long, Keith, don't worry about it. We can take it up later.
Yeah, it might be better to. I'm not sure, to be honest. That's the best way to do it. Something like the fill effect with the appropriate value curve would probably be a much better way to create the outcome that you're after. I mean, one of the challenges in Xlights is there's often multiple ways to do something, and choosing often there's a hard way and there's an easier way, and finding the right way is the best thing. The problem with the liquid effect is the liquid effect is going to have stuff going everywhere, and it's not going to be a smooth reveal, whereas the fill effect would give you a much smoother filling of the snowman, I think. But yeah, there are a couple other options. A curtain could do it as well, to be honest.
Garlands, bars with the curtain.
Thank you.
Yeah, garlands, maybe not so much because it drops from the top down and it doesn't sound like the effect that he's after.
You can go any direction with garlands now.
Yeah, but it drops. It travels across the model and then fills up. Whereas the way I heard Mike describe it, he just wanted it to fill up.
To try to go along with the song, do you want to build a snowman?
Yeah, I'd be using something like the curtain or the fill effect, to be honest, I think.
All right. Thank you, Keith. I'll try that.
Can't you just use bars?
The problem with bars is it goes through cycles, and so yeah, it wouldn't be best. Curtain would be old school. Fill effect would be new school.
Okay. FYI, we're still recording, Keith.
Yeah, I know we are. That's okay. I'm happy to take questions. I mean, look, the questions are often the most powerful thing because it gives people an opportunity to clarify. Guys, if you're not sure, there is no such thing as a dumb question here. No one's gonna jump on you. No one's gonna say, well, how can you ask such a stupid question? You know, if you have a question and you need something cleared up, ask. You know, it took me ages to get the whole Universe Start Channel thing. I went to 2 minis and I sat there and I listened to these people talk about Universe and Start Channel, and it just got to a point where I had to put up my hand and say, guys, I just don't get it. What the hell is this thing, and can someone actually explain it? And someone got up on a whiteboard, they spent 10 minutes, and you know, everything became clear. And it's when you start to understand these concepts that you start to get what's going on, and it makes troubleshooting and everything so much easier.
Another thing, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Keith. I only heard bits and pieces of what you were saying, but when you're going through what you need to post on a forum or let's say Facebook, when you're having a problem.
No, we did go through that.
Well, no, I'm saying when you were going through that, did you mention to when you have specific problems such as like channel overlaps or like I turn on my tree and my matrix turns on, did you tell them to use check sequence?
We briefly went over check sequence. A couple other things I would mention is if you want to, there are a couple of things on this tools menu that are quite useful. We talked about check sequence. Check sequence is our attempt to take an understanding of all the questions and all the problems that people experience. And, you know, as much as Xlights tries to make it hard for you to make mistakes, one of the powers of Xlights is obviously that you can do almost anything. And, you know, we could dumb Xlights down, we could make it a lot harder for you to make mistakes, but in doing so, we would then prevent a whole bunch of people from doing a whole bunch of things that they want to do. And so we choose to make it easy for people to do stuff. And part of the cost of that is that it's possible for you to get yourself into knots. What Check Sequence does is it attempts to build all of that understanding and knowledge into a whole bunch of checks which get done across your sequence, your layout, your setup, and it will flag warnings. And the warnings are things where it's not illegal, it's okay to do what you're doing, but, you know, it may not be what you expected. And consequently, we expect you to understand why the warning occurred before you just reject it out of hand. If Check Sequence gives you an error, then quite frankly, there is no reason on God's earth to do what you're doing, and you should go and fix it. Absolutely. The other one, there's this package log files. What package log files will do is it will produce a minimal packaging of your layout, your setup. If you have a sequence open, it will include just the sequence file itself. It won't include all of the images and videos or whatever else you may be using in that sequence. And it will include the log files, which you can see by clicking on the view log if you really want to, into a zip file, which you can then post to us. And you can lodge it on GitHub, you can post it on Facebook. Generally speaking, we prefer that you don't PM them to us unless we ask you to. And they let us often reproduce problems that you might be experiencing. Sometimes we will ask you to do a package sequence. A package sequence is a little bit different. It excludes the log file, but what it does do is it includes all of the things that are necessary to produce your sequence. And that means it may include copyrighted content, such as the audio, etc. And so you'll need to be sensitive about where you post such things. The other thing is if you are doing a package log files and your sequence happens to include purchased content, we would strongly suggest that you do PM it to us and not post it onto open forums. That content does belong to someone and you don't actually have the rights to be sharing that around. Although I don't know of anyone who sells content that would have issues with you sending it to Gil or Dan or myself to look at, because you know, at the end of the day, they want their sequences to work. So hopefully that helps people. Oh, you won't get the Crash Xlights or Log Render State. They're special builds for me.
See, we are able to crash Xlights well, they can crash Xlights whenever they want.
Yeah.
And depending how hard you try, you can probably do the same.
So if you want to crash Xlights, right, you'll get one of these dialogues. Okay. Now, we really encourage you to type something in here to describe what you were doing when you crashed Xlights. Because we actually get this text when you click the OK button. It will upload all of these files and it will upload this text, and we look at these periodically. About once every release, we go through all of the crashes that people have uploaded and we look for problems that we can go and fix. And when you describe what happened, what you were doing, that lets us know, and then we can go away and see if we can reproduce the problem. If you include your email address in here, then we can also reach out to you and maybe ask you questions or whatever. That's up to you though. These get uploaded to a secure website when you click the OK button. If you click cancel, then it won't be uploaded. Any other questions?
Keith, I've got a question for you. When you're on the crash reports, wouldn't you want the people to try and duplicate that before they send that to you?
Well, to be honest, look, either way, a bug that is incredibly reproducible, something that you know you can reproduce every time, that then we can reproduce, will almost certainly get fixed within days. If you have a crash that you can't reproduce, we still do collect the log files and we look at them. Sometimes we can ascertain what happened even from a single crash. Sometimes we can't, but what we do is we accumulate an understanding of what's going on from all those crashes. What I do is I actually sort them, right? I get them into a folder, I go into each one, I look at where it crashed, I sort them all together, and then I go and look for commonalities between those crashes. And if I'm able to spot anything that's common or whatever, often I can either work out what's going wrong, or I can actually find the area of code where the crash occurs, and I can put some additional logging in so that the next time it crashes in the next release, I'll have a little bit more information about what was going on and potentially find the root cause of the problem. So no, I'll take crash logs either way. Like I said, by default, type your stuff in, click OK, and generally speaking, it will get uploaded to us. If you can reproduce the crash reliably, then posting to us is a much better way to get it fixed because it draws attention to it. If you just do the upload, like I said, we look at it typically once per release, and we may not see your crash. We don't look at all of them. Like I say, I look at it once per release, and typically a couple of weeks after the release goes out, we have a look at how many crashes we're getting. Are we getting lots of crashes in one place? And if that's the case, then we'll spend some time on it. If not, we'll just we'll move on. So it's still worth posting to us or getting onto GitHub. For those that have never seen GitHub before, this is where you can find all the source code to Xlite, but there is an issues repository here, which has a whole bunch of issues that people have had, and we get notified whenever someone posts in here. This guy here's had a whole bunch of crashes. You'll tend to get responses. Here I've responded asking for his crash logs. Gil's responded showing him how to get his crash logs, and then he's posted his crash logs so we could go and have a look at it. So this is one where we've got a fair chance of finding out what's going on. Any other questions? He was hanging out on my Christmas lights a few years back. All right, well, if not, I will stop the call and get the video going. And actually, while this is happening, so because Xlite's crashed, Xlite's was doing those auto saves in the background, and what it's found is that there was an RGBFX file, so I'd made some changes to the layout which were newer than my current RGBFX file. So basically the autosave file seems to be newer than my actual RGBFX file. And at this point I can decide to ignore that and throw that autosave file away, or I can say actually I want that autosave file to be recovered and become my, my file. Now when this happens, we've always backed up everything. So answering yes and then saying, oh Jesus, that actually wasn't what I wanted is not the end of the world, because there will be a backup of that RGBFX file inside the backup folder. So I can say yes and it will recover it, and odds are I didn't lose anything in this layout despite the fact that I did the crash. And it'll do similar things with your sequences files as well, to try and prompt you to recover them. All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time this morning. Yes, it's gone on longer than planned. It always does. Hopefully you got something out of it this morning. I'm gonna shut this down. I'm gonna exit the call and then I'll pop back in for a while if anyone has anything that they want to follow up with.
By the way, Keith, you recorded it to the cloud, so we'll have to log into the Zoom account online to grab that file.
Did I? I don't think I did.
It was